Welcome to Reveal Fears. Subscribe and like this video.
Part 1. The Silent Room. Detective Liam Croft knew better than to trust quiet spaces. The rookie mistake in his line of work was assuming that silence equaled safety. Yet, as he stood inside the dimly lit office of Cypress Arms Apartment 4C, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The room reeked of decay, not just from the expired milk on the counter or the week-old pile of takeout boxes on the floor. It was something deeper. The kind of rot that lingered after the soul had abandoned the body. But the body, Paul Kendrick's body, was nowhere to be found. The victim's girlfriend had reported him missing 3 days ago, but the absence of foul play wasn't the disturbing part. Croft's partner, Detective Alana Finch, had spotted something during their walk through. A single, high-backed chair was facing the large window overlooking the street, its wooden arms polished from overuse. Resting on the seat was a pocket knife. Open. Clean. No blood. "You see this?" Finch murmured, crouching to examine the knife. Croft nodded. "It's staged. Or it's bait," she replied. The shadows seemed to deepen as Croft pulled a flashlight from his belt, its beam catching dust motes floating in the stale air. He moved toward the window, where faint streaks, possibly fingerprints, marked the glass. He could feel Finch's unease radiating behind him, though she didn't voice it. Years on the force had taught them both to keep their poker faces intact, even when every instinct screamed to run. The chair creaked as Croft leaned closer to inspect the smudges. It was subtle but unmistakable. The glass pane had been cracked open just enough to let in the breeze, or something else. "Think he jumped?" Finch asked, breaking the silence. Croft shook his head. "If he did, someone made sure we'd never find the landing spot." From the corner of his eye, he spotted a faint line of grime trailing toward the bedroom. He followed it cautiously, stepping over the scattered detritus of a life interrupted, a broken watch, a crumpled receipt, and a coffee cup with lipstick smears that matched the girlfriend's description. His gut churned as he reached the bedroom door. It was ajar, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. Finch stepped in behind him, her gun drawn. "Don't like this, Croft." "Me neither." The moment he pushed the door open, the smell hit them. Coppery and thick, it clawed its way into his nostrils and throat. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on the bed. It wasn't blood, it was something worse. Part 2. The Echo of Hands. Croft swallowed hard as the flashlight revealed the bed. The sheets, once white, had been smeared with greasy black handprints. They crisscrossed each other, chaotic and overlapping, as though dozens of hands had clawed at the surface in a frenzy. But the most unnerving detail was the spacing. Some prints were far too large to belong to any human, while others were impossibly small, like a child's. "Jesus Christ!" Finch breathed behind him. What even is this?" Croft crouched, his face grim. The black substance glistened under the flashlight beam, its oily sheen betraying an unnatural origin. He hesitated before lightly brushing the edge of one print with his gloved hand. "It's not blood," he murmured, his voice low. "Feels slick. Like tar, but thinner." Finch moved toward the nightstand, where a single photograph rested against the wall. It was old, the edges yellowed and curling, the kind of picture that had been developed in a darkroom decades ago. The image showed a man, Paul Kendrick, with his arms slung around a younger woman. They stood in front of a weathered house, smiling. "That the girlfriend?" Finch asked, holding it up. "Doesn't look like her," Croft said. "Different hair. This one's older. Ex-wife maybe? Could be. But look closer. The background, see that house?" Finch squinted at the photograph, then tilted it toward the light. The house was unremarkable at first glance, just a plain 2-story building with peeling paint and sagging gutters. But there was a silhouette in the second-floor window. Faint, almost an illusion, but unmistakably there. A shape. Human-like. Watching. Croft took the photo from her, his pulse quickening. "Could be a reflection," Finch offered, though her voice carried little conviction. "Maybe," Croft said, but his gut told him otherwise. Behind them, the sound of movement echoed faintly from the living room, a low creak, like weight shifting on the wooden floor. Finch turned sharply, her weapon raised. "Thought we were alone," she whispered. "We were," Croft said. He tightened his grip on his flashlight, sweeping it across the room as they moved back into the hall. The chair by the window was now empty. The knife was gone. "Stay sharp," Croft muttered, his voice a razor-thin thread of calm. Something metallic clattered in the kitchen. Finch moved toward it, her steps cautious but deliberate. Croft covered her, his flashlight sweeping the shadows as she pushed open the kitchen door. A butcher knife lay on the floor, its blade reflecting the pale moonlight streaming through the window. But it wasn't the knife that stopped them cold, it was the words scrawled on the tiled wall behind it. Written in the same oily black substance that coated the bed, the words were jagged and uneven, as though clawed into the surface. "I saw what you did." Part 3, the message. "Back up," Croft ordered, his voice sharp. Finch didn't argue. She stepped away from the wall, guns still trained on the empty room. Croft studied the message. The letters gleamed faintly in the light, the black substance congealing and dripping in slow rivulets toward the floor. He crouched to examine the knife, careful not to disturb its position. The blade was clean, no blood, no fingerprints, just the faint scent of something chemical, almost acrid. "Same stuff as the bed," he muttered. "Think it's paint?" Finch asked, though they both knew better. "Doesn't smell like it. Could be some kind of resin." He stood, the faint creak of his knees breaking the silence. "Whatever it is, it's fresh. Someone's been here, Finch." Her jaw tightened. "You think they're still here?" Before he could answer, a faint sound interrupted them. A low, rhythmic tapping. It came from the apartment's bathroom at the end of the hall, the sound muffled but steady, like knuckles gently rapping against wood. Finch's eyes darted to Croft. "Tell me that's a leaky pipe." "Only one way to find out," Croft said grimly. They moved in tandem, each step slow and deliberate. The tapping grew louder as they approached, but its rhythm remained unsettlingly even. Tap, tap, tap. Croft reached for the bathroom door, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. With one quick motion, he pushed it open. The bathroom was empty, but the noise continued. The tap was coming from the shower, the curtain drawn tightly closed. Finch gestured toward the curtain with her gun. Croft nodded. He grabbed the edge of the fabric and yanked it back in one swift motion, the metal rings screeching along the rod. The bathtub was empty, no intruder, no dripping faucet, nothing. But the sound didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. Croft swung his flashlight toward the ceiling. The vent above the shower rattled with each tap. A single screw dangled loose from its cover, letting the vent lid shift slightly with each vibration. "Rodents?" Finch suggested, though the unease in her tone betrayed her doubt. "Maybe," Croft said, but he didn't believe it. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wrapped it around his fingers, and began unscrewing the remaining bolts holding the vent cover in place. As the last screw came free, the cover dropped into the tub with a metallic clang. Croft shone his flashlight into the vent's dark maw. Something was wedged inside. He reached in, his fingers brushing against coarse fabric. He tugged, the object resisting slightly before giving way. When he pulled it free, both he and Finch froze. It was a shirt. A man's shirt, soaked in the same oily black substance that coated the bed and the walls. Croft held it at arm's length, his nose wrinkling at the pungent odor. "Check the tag," Finch said, her voice tight. Croft unfolded the fabric gingerly, revealing the label stitched inside the collar. The name, Kendrick, was written in black marker. "That's our missing guy," Finch murmured. But as Croft turned the shirt over, his stomach sank. Written across the back in the same jagged scrawl was another message. "I'm still here." Part 4, Shadows in the Walls. The words on the shirt felt heavier than the shirt itself. Croft's mind churned with questions as he handed it to Finch, who folded it carefully into an evidence bag. "What the hell is this?" Finch muttered. Croft didn't answer. His flashlight cut through the small space of the bathroom, tracing each corner for anything they might have missed. He felt it now, an oppressive energy, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. "Let's keep moving," Croft said. They stepped back into the hallway, the air feeling colder. The apartment's silence pressed in around them like a shroud. Croft's eyes lingered on the black smudges on the floor, following the faint trail they'd seen earlier. It stretched past the bedroom and ended at a closet near the front door. As they approached, Finch frowned. "Did you close that?" The closet door was shut now, though Croft distinctly remembered it being ajar when they arrived. "Nope," he said. Finch raised her gun. "This is where it gets good, right?" Croft didn't answer. He gripped the closet's brass handle and pulled it open. The space inside was crammed with the detritus of daily life, an old vacuum cleaner, cardboard boxes, a winter coat still smelling faintly of mothballs. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Croft noticed something strange about the back wall. It was too clean, its surface smooth and unblemished compared to the scuffed drywall around it. "Something's off," he said, stepping closer. He ran his fingers along the edge of the wall. The seams felt uneven. Finch leaned in. "A false panel?" Croft didn't respond. He pressed on the edges, feeling for a weak point. With a low creak, the panel gave way, swinging inward to reveal a narrow, pitch-black crawlspace. "Oh, hell no," Finch muttered. The smell hit them immediately, earthy, damp, and metallic, the same scent that had lingered in the bedroom. Croft aimed his flashlight into the opening, the beam illuminating a short tunnel that extended deeper into the building. "It doesn't connect to another unit," Croft said. "This was built for a reason." "Yeah," Finch replied. "To make sure I never sleep again." Croft ignored her, his instincts screaming that they had to go in. He crouched and crawled through the opening, the walls brushing uncomfortably close to his shoulders. Finch followed reluctantly, her muttered curses echoing in the confined space. The tunnel sloped downward slightly, the dirt floor crunching under their knees. The flashlight revealed odd markings etched into the walls, lines and shapes that didn't resemble any language Croft recognized. "What is this place?" Finch asked, her voice tight. "I don't know, but—" Croft stopped abruptly. Finch nearly bumped into him. "What?" she asked, her voice rising. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. Croft's flashlight flickered as it revealed the center of the room, a single chair, identical to the one by the window. Resting on the seat was something small and metallic. Croft stepped closer, his flashlight trembling in his hand. It was a wristwatch. He didn't need to check the inscription etched on the back. He'd seen it in the report. Paul Kendrick. Part 5, The Walls Speak. Croft's pulse quickened as he crouched to examine the watch. The metal was cold, its face cracked but still ticking faintly, the hands frozen at 3:13. "He was here," Finch said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just here," Croft muttered, straightening. "Someone left this for us to find." He turned slowly, his flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber. The walls were covered in more of the same jagged, unfamiliar markings. Some were carved deep into the dirt, others smeared in the now familiar black substance. Croft traced a pattern with his eyes, his gut twisting as he realized it wasn't random. The symbols formed a spiral, each line growing tighter as it funneled toward the chair in the center. Finch moved closer, her unease palpable. "What do you think these mean?" "Could be a message," Croft replied, his voice low. "Or a warning." As if in response, a faint sound echoed from the tunnel behind them, a shuffle, soft and deliberate. Finch turned sharply, her gun raised. "You hear that?" she asked. Croft nodded. "We're not alone." The sound came again, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow, dragging. "Back to back," Croft whispered. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their flashlights casting twin beams into the suffocating dark. The footsteps paused, then resumed, the rhythm unsteady, like someone limping toward them. Croft strained his ears, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" No answer. The tunnel seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier. Finch tightened her grip on her weapon, her jaw clenched. I don't do ghosts, Croft, she muttered. Good, Croft said. Because this isn't one. The sound stopped again, and silence pressed against them like a second skin. Croft stepped toward the tunnel, his flashlight beam piercing the darkness. He could feel Finch's tension radiating behind him. Then, from the chamber's far corner, came a faint rasp. It wasn't footsteps, it was breathing. Croft swung his light toward the sound, the beam illuminating a figure crouched in the shadows. For a moment, his mind struggled to make sense of it. The person's face was obscured, their body wrapped in tattered, dirt-smeared fabric. Police! Finch barked, her voice breaking the silence. Show your hands! The figure didn't move. Croft stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. I said, show your hands! The figure tilted its head slowly, as if considering his words. Then, with deliberate motion, it raised one arm. The hand was covered in the black substance, its fingers twisted unnaturally. Stay back! Finch yelled, but before she could move, the figure lunged. Croft reacted instinctively, his flashlight dropping as he raised his arms to block the attack. The figure's strength was inhuman, its filthy hand closing around his wrist with crushing force. Croft! Finch fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The figure released him instantly, retreating into the shadows with an ear-piercing shriek. Croft scrambled for his flashlight, the beam catching the figure's retreating form as it disappeared into the tunnel. You okay? Finch asked, her breathing ragged. Croft nodded, flexing his wrist. We're getting out of here. Now. They didn't need to argue. Together they stumbled back through the crawl space, the tunnel's suffocating darkness pressing in around them. As they emerged into the apartment, the faint sound of laughter echoed behind them, low and guttural, like it came from the walls themselves. Croft slammed the closet door shut, his chest heaving. We're dealing with something way beyond missing persons, Finch said, her voice shaking. Croft stared at the closet, his mind racing. This isn't just a crime scene. It's a trap. Part 6, Unseen Strings. Croft and Finch stood in the apartment's dim light, their backs to the closet as though turning away might erase what had just happened. But the laughter that echoed from the crawl space still lingered in Croft's ears, haunting and mocking. This place is wrong, Finch said, holstering her gun with trembling hands. You don't say, Croft muttered, his mind spinning. He scanned the room, his flashlight catching on the high-backed chair by the window, the same chair that had been empty moments ago. Now, draped over its armrest, was a jacket. Croft stepped forward cautiously, Finch close behind him. The jacket was navy blue, torn and stained. He didn't need to check the label to know who it belonged to. Kendrick's, Finch murmured. Croft's stomach churned as he reached into the jacket's pocket. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled out a small object, a key. It was old, its surface pitted with rust, but its shape was distinctive, a skeleton key, the kind used for doors that no longer existed in modern architecture. Where does this fit? Finch asked, her voice tight. Croft studied the key, his thumb running over its jagged teeth. Not here. This is for something else. Like what? Before Croft could answer, a low hum filled the room, faint but unmistakable. It vibrated in his chest, a sensation both mechanical and alive. Do you hear that? Finch whispered. Croft nodded. He followed the sound, his flashlight scanning the apartment. The hum grew louder as he approached the kitchen. On the counter sat a small, old-fashioned radio. Its dials were cracked, the antenna bent at an awkward angle, but its speaker emitted the rhythmic static of a station not quite tuned in. That wasn't here before, Finch said, her voice barely audible. Croft didn't respond. He adjusted the dial cautiously, the static warping into faint whispers. Go to him. The words were distorted, barely discernible, but they sent a chill down Croft's spine. He leaned closer, the whispers growing louder, clearer. Find the house. Finch grabbed his arm. Turn it off. Croft hesitated, his instincts warring with his rational mind. Then he twisted the dial sharply, silencing the radio. This isn't just about Kendrick, he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. This is a trail. Someone's leaving breadcrumbs. For us? Finch asked, incredulous. For whoever they think will follow, Croft replied grimly. Finch shook her head, her frustration boiling over. We need backup, Croft. This isn't some two-detective operation anymore. We have a missing person, cryptic messages, and whatever the hell that thing was in the crawl space. Before she could finish, the apartment's front door creaked open. Both detectives spun around, weapons drawn. Who's there? Croft demanded. The hallway beyond was empty, the door swaying slightly on its hinges. But there, just beyond the threshold, lay an envelope. Croft approached it slowly, Finch covering him. The envelope was unmarked, its edges smudged with the same black substance that coated the walls and bed. He opened it, his stomach sinking as he unfolded the note inside. The message was scrawled in shaky handwriting, each letter uneven and jagged. The key opens the final door. He is waiting. Croft looked up at Finch, his face pale. Who the hell is he? She asked. Croft didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the hallway outside, his gut telling him that they were already on a path they couldn't turn back from. Part 7. The House on Elmwood. The address on the back of the envelope led them to Elmwood Street, a quiet, tree-lined stretch on the city's outskirts. The houses here were older, built in the 1930s, their facades weathered and their windows clouded with years of grime. Croft parked the car under a streetlight that flickered faintly against the thickening fog. Finch glanced at the GPS, then up at the darkened silhouette of a house looming at the end of the block. This is it, she said. Croft followed her gaze. The house stood apart from its neighbors, its sagging porch and broken shutters giving it a distinctly abandoned air. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the lawn, its lettering faded and streaked with dirt. You ready for this? Finch asked, her hand resting on the door handle. Not even close, Croft replied, stepping out of the car. The fog swallowed their footsteps as they approached the house. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of mildew. Croft glanced up at the second-floor windows, half expecting to see a silhouette watching them. But the glass reflected only the pale glow of the streetlight. The front door was ajar, its lock rusted and useless. Croft pushed it open with his shoulder, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the house was silent. The air felt heavy, saturated with an old, musty odor that clung to their lungs. The floorboards creaked underfoot as they stepped into the foyer, their flashlights casting long shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. Something's been here, Finch said, pointing to the ground. Croft followed her beam to a set of muddy footprints leading from the door and vanishing deeper into the house. They were large, heavy, and uneven, as if the person had been dragging one leg. He crouched to examine them, his mind racing. Recent. Finch frowned. How recent? Hours, maybe less. A sound broke the stillness, a faint rustling, like paper crumpling in the wind. Finch's flashlight snapped toward the noise, but there was nothing there. This place is alive, she muttered. Croft ignored her, his focus drawn to the footprints. They led toward a narrow staircase at the end of the hallway. The wood was warped and splintered, but the trail was clear. Upstairs, Croft said, rising to his feet. They ascended slowly, each step creaking under their weight. The second floor was darker, the air colder. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that hung open like silent mouths. Which one? Finch whispered. Croft's flashlight landed on the last door to the right. It was closed, its surface pristine compared to the others. Only one way to find out, he said, moving toward it. The door opened with surprising ease, revealing a small, barren room. Its walls were bare, and the floor was covered in a fine layer of dust, except for a circle in the center, where the wood was polished smooth. In the circle stood a table. On it was an old rotary phone, its receiver resting beside the cradle. "You're kidding me," Finch said, her voice trembling with disbelief. Croft approached the table, his flashlight revealing the phone's tarnished surface. It looked ancient, its cord frayed and twisted. As he reached for it, the phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, piercing and shrill. Finch jumped, her gun aimed at the inanimate object. "Don't answer it," she said, her voice firm but shaking. Croft hesitated, his hand hovering over the receiver. The ringing continued, each shrill burst echoing in the confined space. "Croft, I mean it, don't!" Finch barked. But something compelled him. Slowly, he picked up the receiver and held it to his ear. At first, there was only static, a crackling hiss that seemed to seep into his skull. Then, faintly, a voice emerged from the noise. "You're too late." The line went dead. Part 8: The Warning. Croft lowered the receiver, his face pale. The words lingered in his ears like a whisper carried by the wind. "Who was it?" Finch asked, her voice sharp with urgency. Croft shook his head. "I don't know. Just static." Then a voice said, "You're too late." Finch stared at him, her grip tightening on her gun. "Too late for what?" The phone rang again. Croft and Finch both flinched, the shrill sound tearing through the stillness of the house. Finch stepped back, her breath quickening. "Leave it," she said. "Let it ring." But Croft couldn't. His hand moved instinctively, his fingers curling around the receiver. The ringing stopped the moment he touched it. He raised it to his ear again, expecting static. This time, the voice was clear. "You should have stayed away." The line went dead once more, the room plunging back into silence. Croft's hand trembled as he set the receiver back onto the cradle. "Someone's playing with us," Finch said, her voice taut. Croft stepped back, his eyes scanning the room. "Maybe. Or maybe it's a warning." "Warning us about what?" Finch pressed. Before Croft could answer, a noise echoed from below, a loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. "Downstairs!" Finch hissed, already moving toward the door. Croft followed, his flashlight slicing through the darkness as they descended the stairs. The sound had come from the kitchen, where the dim light of their flashlights revealed shards of glass scattered across the floor. The window above the sink was broken, the jagged edges glittering in the light. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth. "Someone came in," Finch muttered, her eyes darting toward the footprints in the dust. The trail of muddy prints was gone. Croft's chest tightened. "No, they went out." A faint movement caught their attention. A piece of paper fluttered against the counter, pinned beneath a heavy, rusted knife. Finch approached it cautiously, her gun raised. She slid the paper out from under the knife, her eyes narrowing as she read the words scrawled across it. "Leave now or he'll make you stay." "Who the hell is he?" Finch asked, her voice cracking. Croft didn't respond. His flashlight flickered, its beam dimming for a moment before returning to full strength. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, frost creeping along the edges of the broken window. "We need to get out of here," Finch said, her urgency unmistakable. Croft hesitated, his gaze lingering on the footprints that had vanished as if erased by unseen hands. He glanced back at the rusted knife, its blade smeared with a faint, oily black residue. "Not yet," he said finally. "Are you out of your damn mind?" Finch snapped. "This place is screaming at us to leave." Croft stepped toward the back door, his gut pulling him forward despite the chill running down his spine. "Whoever's doing this, whoever he is, they're trying to scare us off. But we're not done." Finch groaned in frustration, but she followed him as he pushed open the back door. The fog outside had thickened, the yard barely visible beyond a few feet. A path of trampled grass led away from the house, disappearing into the shadows of the surrounding trees. Croft tightened his grip on his flashlight. "Let's find out where this leads." "You're killing me," Finch muttered, but she fell into step beside him. As they followed the path, the fog seemed to close in around them, the world beyond the beam of their flashlights fading into obscurity. The air grew colder, each breath visible as a puff of vapor. Ahead, a faint light flickered through the trees, beckoning them forward like a will-o'-the-wisp. "I don't like this," Finch said, her voice low. "Neither do I," Croft replied, his steps slowing. The light resolved into the glow of an old lantern, hanging from a gnarled tree. Beneath it, the ground was disturbed, the earth churned as if something had been recently dug up, or buried. Croft's flashlight caught the edge of an object protruding from the dirt. A hand. Part 9. The hand beneath the lantern. Croft froze, his flashlight locked on the partially unearthed hand. It was pale and lifeless, the fingers twisted unnaturally, as if they had clawed desperately at the dirt before stilling forever. "Tell me that's fake," Finch said, her voice cracking. Croft crouched, his breath misting in the icy air. He extended a gloved hand toward the protruding limb, his stomach tightening. When his fingers brushed the cold, clammy skin, he knew it was real. "It's a body," he said grimly. "Of course it is," Finch muttered, her voice tinged with rising panic. "Why wouldn't it be?" Croft grabbed his utility knife and began cutting away at the dense earth around the hand. The lantern's light cast eerie shadows over the scene, the skeletal branches above them creaking in the windless night. As he worked, more of the body came into view. The victim was male, his face half buried, but enough was visible to confirm his identity. "Paul Kendrick," Croft murmured, the name bitter on his tongue. Finch shined her flashlight over the corpse, her eyes narrowing. "What the hell is that on his chest?" Croft leaned closer, his stomach churning as he saw the symbols carved into Kendrick's skin. They were identical to the markings in the apartment and the crawlspace, jagged lines forming intricate, nonsensical patterns. "This wasn't random," Croft said, his voice low. "This was ritualistic." Finch shook her head, stepping back. "This is insane, Croft. We're not equipped to deal with this kind of thing. We need to call it in, get a full team out here." Croft hesitated, his eyes lingering on Kendrick's lifeless face. Something about this felt deliberate, like they were being fed just enough to keep them moving. Before he could respond, a faint sound cut through the night. Laughter. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. Croft and Finch spun around, their flashlights scanning the darkness. The fog seemed thicker now, swirling like a living thing. "Where's it coming from?" Finch whispered, her voice trembling. Croft couldn't answer. The laughter echoed again, this time accompanied by the crunch of footsteps in the underbrush. "Show yourself!" Croft barked, his gun drawn. The footsteps stopped, but the fog continued to writhe, curling toward them like grasping fingers. A voice emerged from the haze, soft and mocking. "Too late, detectives. You're already his." Finch's grip on her gun tightened. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice chuckled. "It's not about what I want. It's about what he needs." The lantern above them flickered violently before going out, plunging them into near-total darkness. Croft swung his flashlight wildly, but the beams seemed swallowed by the fog. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady despite the dread clawing at his chest. "Don't have to tell me twice." Finch muttered, her silhouette barely visible beside him. The laughter faded, replaced by silence so profound it pressed against their ears. Then, from the direction of the house, they heard the sound of a door creaking open. Croft turned toward it, his flashlight catching the faint outline of the back door. It was wide open, the blackness beyond it yawning like a void. "This is a trap," Finch said, her voice shaking. "I know," Croft replied. But even as he said it, his feet were moving, drawn inexorably back toward the house. Part 10. Back into the shadows. The house loomed larger as they approached, its broken windows glinting faintly in the dim light of Croft's flashlight. The open door seemed to pull them forward, the darkness beyond it alive with unspoken threats. "Croft, don't," Finch urged, her voice low but firm. He hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to heed her warning. But something stronger, the need for answers, for understanding, kept him moving. "If we leave now, we'll never know who's behind this," he said. "Good," Finch shot back. Maybe we're not supposed to know. Maybe we're not supposed to survive this. Croft ignored her, stepping over the threshold. The house greeted them with an unnatural stillness, the air colder than it had been outside. Their flashlights barely pierced the darkness, the beams trembling as though the light itself was afraid. The footprints in the dust were back, clearer than before, leading deeper into the house. Croft followed them, his steps slow and deliberate. Finch trailed behind, her gun drawn, her breath audible in the oppressive silence. The trail led them to the living room, where the high-backed chair sat waiting. This time, it wasn't empty. A man sat slumped in the chair, his face obscured by shadows. His hands rested limply on the armrests, his fingers caked with the same oily black residue they'd seen on Kendrick's chest. Croft's flashlight illuminated the man's face, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Paul Kendrick. Or at least it had been. His eyes were wide open, but lifeless, staring at the ceiling. His mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, his lips smeared with the black substance. Symbols were carved into his forehead, bleeding sluggishly. Finch cursed under her breath, backing away. This isn't possible. We just found his body outside. Croft stepped closer, his stomach twisting. This isn't outside, and nothing about this is right. Before he could examine the body further, a new sound filled the room, a faint scratching, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the walls, soft at first, but growing louder, more frantic. Finch's flashlight swung toward the noise, catching the wallpaper as it began to ripple and tear. "Croft," she said, her voice trembling. "Something's in the walls." The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. Then, with a deafening crack, the wallpaper burst open. A hand shot out from the wall, clawing at the air. It was long and pale, its fingers impossibly thin, tipped with jagged black nails. Finch fired, the gunshot echoing through the house. The hand recoiled, retreating into the wall with a guttural hiss. "We're done here," Finch said, grabbing Croft's arm. He didn't argue. Together they stumbled back toward the front door, their flashlights flickering wildly. The walls groaned and trembled around them, as if the house itself was trying to trap them inside. As they reached the threshold, the front door slammed shut, throwing them into darkness. "Move!" Croft shouted, shoving the door open with all his strength. They spilled out onto the porch, the cold night air hitting them like a slap. Behind them, the house seemed to sigh, its windows dark and unyielding. Neither of them spoke as they reached the car, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Croft's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, starting the engine and peeling away from the curb. Finch broke the silence first. "We're in way over our heads, Croft." "I know," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Whatever's going on, it's not done with us." Croft didn't respond, but he knew she was right. Part 11: The Puppeteer. The silence in the car was suffocating, broken only by the occasional groan of the engine as Croft pushed it harder than he should have. The fog clung to the streets, thick and impenetrable, forcing him to navigate by memory rather than sight. "We need a plan," Finch said, her voice low but urgent. "We're going to the station," Croft replied. "To do what? Report this to people who won't believe us? Send a forensics team into that house? You think they'll find anything we just saw?" Croft clenched the wheel tighter. She was right, and they both knew it. Whatever was happening, it was designed to elude explanation, to make them seem unhinged if they tried to explain it. Finch sighed, leaning back in her seat. "You saw those symbols, Croft. They're not random. Whoever, or whatever, is behind this is trying to send a message." "But to who?" Croft said. "Us? Kendrick? Maybe it's both." The car's radio crackled to life, startling them both. Static poured from the speakers, loud and insistent. Croft instinctively reached for the knob to turn it off, but then the static shifted. "Detective Croft." The voice was faint but unmistakable, distorted like it was coming from the depths of a well. Croft's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" he demanded. The voice didn't answer immediately. When it spoke again, it was slower, more deliberate. You should have stayed away, but now you're part of it. Croft slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the empty road. He turned to Finch, her face as pale as his felt. Where is this coming from? Finch whispered. Croft grabbed the radio mic, his hands shaking. Who are you? The static flared again, then receded into quiet. But just as they thought the transmission was over, the voice returned, clearer now, almost amused. He's been watching you, since the apartment, since the first step you took. Who's watching? Croft demanded, his voice rising. The voice chuckled, low and guttural. You know who. He's always been watching. The radio went dead. Croft stared at it, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to throw the car in reverse and keep driving until they were miles away from whatever had ensnared them. But something deeper, something he hated to admit, told him they couldn't run. Finch broke the silence. Whoever or whatever it is, they're pulling the strings. They've been pulling Kendrick's strings, and now they're pulling ours. Croft nodded slowly, gripping the wheel again. And they're not going to stop until we finish this. Finch's jaw tightened. If we even can. Croft didn't respond. He turned the car around, heading back the way they'd come. Croft, what the hell are you doing? Finch said, her voice sharp with panic. He glanced at her, his face set with grim determination. If we're part of this now, we need to know the rules. That house is the only lead we have. You're going to get us killed! Finch shouted, but Croft didn't waver. The fog seemed thicker as they approached Elmwood Street again, the air colder. The house appeared through the haze, its dark silhouette more menacing than before. Croft parked the car, his heart hammering in his chest. Let's end this, he said. Finch sighed heavily, pulling her gun from its holster. You're insane, Croft. But I guess I am too. Together, they stepped out of the car and walked back toward the house, its empty windows watching like lifeless eyes. The front door was open again, waiting for them. Part 12, the final door. The house welcomed them with an eerie stillness, as though it had been waiting. The front door creaked shut behind them, its heavy thud echoing through the darkness. Croft's flashlight scanned the room, the beam weak and sputtering, as if the light itself was afraid to touch this place. Finch stood close, her gun drawn, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. Where do we start? She asked. Croft's gaze fell to the footprints in the dust. They no longer led to the chair in the living room. Instead, they trailed deeper into the house, vanishing into a hallway where the darkness seemed thicker, heavier. We follow, Croft said, his voice low. The hallway stretched before them, narrowing unnaturally, the walls closing in like a tunnel. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a metallic tang that clung to their tongues. At the end of the hall stood a door. It was unlike the others, blackened wood, its surface warped as though scorched by fire. The key from Kendrick's jacket weighed heavily in Croft's pocket, as if it had been growing heavier the closer they came. Finch stopped. Croft, this is it. You know it is. Croft nodded, swallowing hard. Stay behind me. He pulled the skeleton key from his pocket, the metal cold against his skin. As he slid it into the lock, a faint vibration rippled through the floorboards, resonating in his chest. The lock clicked, the sound unnaturally loud. Croft pushed the door open. The room beyond was suffocatingly dark. Croft stepped inside, his flashlight barely illuminating the space. The walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces cracked and tarnished, reflecting fragments of their own light. In the center of the room stood another chair, identical to the ones they'd seen before. This one was occupied. The figure was slumped forward, its face hidden in shadow. The same jagged symbols were carved into its exposed arms and torso, the wounds weeping black. Paul Kendrick, Croft whispered. But as he stepped closer, the figure moved. Its head tilted upward, revealing not Kendrick, but a face that was hollow and empty. The eyes were black voids, the mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. Finch gasped, her gun trembling in her hands. What the hell is that? The figure stood, its movements slow and deliberate, the sound of its joints creaking filling the air. Croft raised his weapon. "Stay where you are!" The figure ignored him, taking a step forward. Its mouth opened, but the voice that emerged was not its own. It was a deep, resonant tone that echoed with 1,000 whispers. "You should not have come here." Croft steadied his aim. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure's grin widened. "I am the one who watches, the one who waits, and now you belong to me." The mirrors shuddered violently, the cracks spreading like veins. The air grew impossibly heavy, pressing against them like an unseen force. Finch screamed, firing her weapon. The bullets hit the figure, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it laughed, a sound that seemed to come from every corner of the room. The mirrors shattered, shards flying through the air. Croft shielded his face as the figure surged forward, its hands outstretched. He fired, the shots deafening in the confined space. The figure stumbled, its grin faltering, but only for a moment. "Run!" Croft shouted, grabbing Finch and dragging her toward the door. The house groaned, the walls trembling as if alive. They stumbled back into the hallway, the darkness closing in around them. Behind them, the figure emerged, its black eyes locked onto Croft. "You cannot escape," it hissed. "You are mine." The front door was in sight, a sliver of moonlight cutting through the darkness. Croft and Finch sprinted toward it, their breaths ragged, the house shaking around them. As they burst outside, the air hit them like a wave. They collapsed on the lawn, gasping, the house behind them eerily silent. Croft turned, his heart hammering. The front door was shut. The windows were dark. Finch sat up, her hands trembling. What the hell was that?" Croft didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the house, its silent facade hiding whatever horrors lay within. He knew this wasn't over.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, and don't miss the next scary stories. Bye-bye.